Hey everybody, Jay Weidner here, Reality Check, and thanks for watching. Hit like and subscribe and all that. And my new film, JFKX, Solving the Crime of the Century, is now out on Amazon Prime. I want to remind you all, and it's cheap. It's only $1.98 to watch it. Support the filmmaker. You know what I mean? Anyway, I will be doing another show here soon on streaming and why streaming is going to destroy the film business and the movie business, and what a stupid, ridiculous mistake the film companies did when they decided to abandon DVDs and cable television and network television and largely theatrical release just to have streaming, which doesn't pay anything. So anyway, I'm going to do a show on that. It's going to be a blister, and I'm not a happy man about it. Um, so basically, it's the end of the entertainment business, I do believe. All right. So today, my guest is going to be a big surprise for you guys. It's Sean David Morton. Hi, Sean. How you doing?
Good, thank you. Thank you for asking. I'm so excited about being here, Jay. I've tried to connect with you for so long,
Yeah,
and I'm
actually,
glad we
I was the
finally
same
done it.
thing. I was trying to connect to you back in the well, we were talking about it the other day. There was this like around 1990, there was a sudden explosion in um, woo, I guess you would call it.
Yeah.
And I was part of that, believe it or not. I had a radio show in Seattle called Mind Over Matters, which was all woo. And I started exactly at that time, right when Art Bell started, and you were working with Art back at the very beginning of that. And of course, the X Files had just started on television, which was the first really true woo show since the Twilight Zone, really. And there was this, 33 years ago, there was this gigantic explosion, and both you and I were part of that. And that's one of the reasons I brought you on. I just want everybody to know that I know about Sean's legal troubles and the SEC and all that, and I know that. And he served his time. He did what he did, and everybody makes mistakes. And believe me, I've been close to an SEC investigation, and that is no fun at
Well,
all.
it wasn't a mistake. The whole thing was a frame job, Jay. I mean, it was that bad.
I
We
believe it.
we, we got involved in foreign exchange trading, which they do not and cannot legally regulate. Um, Let me tell you the good side. I took $300,000 of my money, $250,000 of investors' money, using remote viewing techniques, pendulums, et cetera, the mystic stuff we're talking about, which you're not supposed to be able to do. I turned that into almost $7 million. And then I had a trader when I told the trader that the dollar was going to tank, that the Canadian dollar and the Australian dollar were going to be worth as much as the US dollar, which he said was impossible. I said, it's what's going to happen. Just do it. And he did. He did the exact opposite of everything I told him, admitted in the illegal documents that he illegally traded because he did not do as he was directed. And he lost the money. So the FBI crawled up our ass with a microscope, found we hadn't done anything with the money, that we just took losses. Two people at the end who came in at the end of the investment accounts because I was begging everybody, play with the house's money, get your money out. And when the accounts collapsed, there were only two people really that lost money. And they got cranky. One case was dismissed completely in court, and the other case was this guy was gay, and he had a gay boyfriend in the SEC, and they went after me, and the whole thing was complete crap. And at the very end, the judge said, "Okay, to keep you from being completely embarrassed, I will give you a ruling, but that ruling is not enforceable anywhere outside the tip of the Southern District of New York." And that's what came about from the SEC thing. I don't know why people made a big fuss about that. It was a civil suit.
So
It
you
was
just stay
never
away.
criminal.
You just stay away from tip, and you're okay.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, exactly. I can't
That's
buy.
all
Yeah, I
there
can't buy a
anyway.
house in downtown Manhattan. Yeah, So, and it would have cost me $100,000 to fight it. And I was like, no, screw you. You guys, it's not in your jurisdiction. If you'd been serious, you would have come to Los Angeles to fight this. You're not. And when they threw a bunch of paperwork at me, they said, where are you hiding $7 million? And my attorney
Yeah.
looked at the paperwork and he said, this isn't even us. You subpoenaed a company with the same name as us that holds apartment buildings in Florida that happens to bank with Bank of America. There you go. So that whole thing
Right.
was complete fraud. So there you
That's
go.
all I want to spend on that one.
Thank you.
Not all that interested.
Right.
But I did get it out of the way because I know we're going to get a whole bunch of shit. I mean,
Thank you.
excuse me, YouTube. Um, so anyway, you've been around as long as me, and you've seen like a lot of things going down. And you and I have followed a lot of the same trails uh, into uh, into different rabbit holes and things. And all the stuff that you've looked at over the last 35 years or so, when things started getting weird, um, what's the weirdest thing that you've encountered?
Oh my. A lot of weird stuff. Probably I would say um okay, so in 1990, let's take this way back to when it all started.
Yep.
In 1990, I was directing and producing with a guy named Joe Randazzo, who had a bunch of money at the time, and we put together a documentary series called UFO Contactees.
Oh yeah.
And the Contactees, which later became UFO Library Magazine,
Yep.
in which you could buy DVDs, videos, whatever, of interviews with people that we did all over the world. We collected probably about um, 600 hours of interviews with contactees, scientists, abductees, researchers. One of the first people we interviewed, which was January of 1990, was Bob Lazar. And Lazar had he'd worked at Area 51. He was only there 16 days until May of 89. And then he started coming out and talking about stuff. And then it took me a year to actually get out to Area 51, where we had people like Gary Schultz and Noria Haikawa and Anthony Hilder, who were out there watching the flying saucers fly every Wednesday. And I took a friend of mine who worked for the LA Times, Shannon Sands, and my friend Jeff. And we're driving down the road. It was a dark and stormy night. We got told by the sheriff to turn around because there was a red flag operation going on up the road. And of course, I leaned out of the car in the rain and said, "Oh, you mean the one that's not on the map? This big base you're talking about that's not on the map?" And he goes, "Yeah, wise guy, just turn your car around." And we turned the car around, and as we we're screaming off down the road, Shannon was in the car in front of us with the photographer for the LA Times, and we got swooped by a flying saucer. I mean, this thing came in, it was about 60 feet across. It came in on its edge,
Wow.
flattened out, maneuvered in the road. We crashed the car into a ditch by the side of the road, and then it shot off into the desert. And so Jeff and I got our snow hats on and flashlights, and we chased after this thing. And then it started coming at us, and I turned around and bumped into him, and we're both laying on the ground, just completely scared out of our minds. And it made a sound like a Tibetan bell. It literally went, and with the big halo around the outside of it, and then it went,
Yep.
and then just shot off into the desert.
Yep.
So we run back to the car, jump in the car, go down where there's about probably 30 people at the end of the road, and they're all looking south towards Vegas, towards the lights in Vegas. We're like, no, stupid, it's up there. It's that way. And then we pointed out that this light bouncing around the desert was one of the ships from 5-1. And we figured out that the reason these ships from 5-1 were out there testing was because on Wednesday nights, if they flew above the level of Bald Mountain, they would have to explain what they were doing to the people at Nellis. down the road, the real military guys. So they didn't take any pictures of the UFO. Matter of fact, the guy, the kind of snotty guy who was the photographer, said, I've got a Hasselblad portrait camera that's got a range of 12 feet, and I can't take pictures of a UFO even if I wanted to. And I was told to not take pictures of a UFO, but to take pictures of you people watching a UFO. And I was like, well, that doesn't do us any good. And he got in his car and drove away. And it got crazier later that night. So, but this led to, I believe it was February 27th of 1991, which was actually there's a couple anniversaries coming up. It was the anniversary of the Battle of Los Angeles in 1942, when a UFO swooped downtown Los Angeles and then traveled very slowly over Playa del Rey out to Marina del Rey, went along the coast to Hermosa Beach, and being chased by fighter jets actually made its way out towards Catalina, witnessed by all kinds of people. And everybody thought it was the Japanese. Matter of fact, one of the people we interviewed for it was DeForest Kelley, Bones from Star Trek. And he was a gunnery sergeant out of Long Beach, and he was blasting this thing with 50 caliber missiles. And he said, damnedest thing I ever saw. And actually 14 people died from the ordnance that was bouncing off this ship at the time.
I did an interview with Dr. Scheib is his name, and
Okay.
he lives in Marina del Rey right now, and
Yeah.
he shoots videos of drones that are flying at 2,000 miles an hour coming up out of the ocean, going around a helicopter that's flying by, and then going back down into the water. And he gets them all the time, like every day. He gets these things. He slows them down. You can see them, and they're some kind of there's something there. We know the alien base or whatever it is under Malibu. So,
well, it's not an alien base. It's a submarine base.
Yeah,
a submarine base. Actually, I've spoken to military guys.
Yeah, I have to.
Years ago, back in the 70s, who claim that they were in a submarine. The submarine goes into a submarine pen underneath Malibu and then interconnects through a series of aqueducts to our nuclear loading site in Los Alamos in New Mexico. So that's how far back this goes. And the reason they will not allow us to fly anything supersonic between here and Japan and Hawaii is because there's so much military stuff going on out in the Pacific that we're afraid we will shoot things down. As a matter of fact, they're now talking about there's a brand new aircraft that they're going to have flying by 2030, commercially, mind you, that does Mach 5, runs on hydrogen, and 5 times the speed of sound, and has room for about 100 passengers. And that's going to be flying, they claim, by 2028, 2030. So that's pretty interesting. Anyway,
in like an hour from
California
to Japan.
Yes. So the story in the LA Times appeared the next day, and then it was all over the place. Area 51 had been a local story from that time, where everybody in Vegas knew about it. Nobody outside of it knew. So that led Linda Moulton Howe to pitching a show to Fox. She came up with the name Sightings. And we got a pretty big dude. I mean, if people remember the show Sightings, the host of Sightings was an insider, was a big-time military. Tim White was a big-time military colonel inside the E-ring at the Pentagon, and he's hosting our show. And I was the only one, apparently, that knew who he was. And we did 13 episodes. And there were 5 different production companies all involved: Henry Winkler, Fair Duncombe, all kinds of stuff. And at the end of 13 episodes, the show had been the first show that I produced on Area 51 was the #1 rated show on Fox up to that time. Biggest show ever. And so when they got done with the 13 episodes, these various production companies said, well, they made an ultimatum to Fox that Fox make 24. And Fox said, we can't do that. We can only make, because they didn't understand that was owned by Rupert Murdoch at the time, and he wasn't a citizen. So he had to cover the whole thing under a News Corporation. So he said, we can order 13. That's all we can do. And they got all huffy about it and said, well, we'll go elsewhere. And they said, fine, see ya. And that was the end of sightings. But it didn't stop a TV guy from coming in the next day saying, well, hey, I got an idea for you. You say sightings your number one show. Yes. You want to repeat that success? Yes. I got a show about a couple of FBI agents. One's a critic, one's a believer. And he laid out the whole Bible for him, the whole thing. And he says, and it's called the X-Files. They're like, go. And that was the beginning of the X-Files. People don't realize that sightings led to X-Files, which then led to, one of the biggest success in Fox's history. And had Fox not been this whorehouse network and actually had ratings calculated the same as NBC, CBS, ABC, it was number one. It was the number one show far and away. They did not realize, because Fox was not an actual network at the time. So let me talk about one other anniversary, because I think it's worth stating. As you know, August 13th. I don't know. Today's the 12th, isn't it? Is today the 12th or the 13th?
Today's the 12th.
Today's the 12th. August 13th of 1943 was something called Project Rainbow, also known as the Philadelphia Experiment, also known as the USS Eldridge. While all the smart guys were working on Project Rainbow, you had kind of stupid guys that were working on the Manhattan Project. This project had Einstein, Tesla, Vannevar Bush, John Van Neumann, kind of Edward Teller, who was still trying to convince them to build a hydrogen bomb, and they all worked on the Philadelphia Experiment, which was radar invisibility, and they could not. They were successful at it. Now it's very interesting to me because there was a group above Project Rainbow who called themselves the K Group, and nobody knew who those people were. And the K Group convinced them to perform the Project Rainbow Philadelphia Experiment on a particular day, which was the 13th. And there were biorhythmic cycles to the Earth. In other words, it all plays out along the I Ching in a big 60-year cycle. And just as the I Ching, just as the chessboard has 64 squares to it, and there are 64 hexagrams in I Ching, although there are 60 because it goes in 12-year increments, whatever. So the biological low point for the planet, in other words, the mental, physical, and biological low point of Earth, happens every 20 years. And when this happens, horrible things happen, usually big war, some kind of attack of some kind, and, of course, right dead center of 1943, more people on Earth were dying. World War, you had Japan, you had Germany, and everybody was at war. So it's interesting that when they performed this particular experiment, they managed to rip open holes in the time-space continuum every 20 years. So it was 43, 63, 83, and then it snapped back to the end of a loop, a 60-year massive low point in 2003. So I wrote an article about this in my Delphi Associates newsletter. It's all there in print. I should probably reprint it for people. That Al Bielek, who had probably the craziest story on wheels, and yet everything Al ever told me turned out to be right. All the people were in the places where he said. All the experiments that he talked about turned out to be right. It was funny because before he jumped off the ship, he says, he and Duncan Cameron, he got me this hat. You can see the captain's bars on it. And he said it had fallen off the captain's head. And he grabbed it and he jumped off the ship. And he claims that he and Duncan Cameron wound up in the year 2139. And that the Eldridge would snap back on August 13th of 2003. And lo and behold, weirdly enough, I wrote a whole article about this, about how this technology was then used on very advanced minesweepers, and that there would be some kind of massive electromagnetic pulse on that particular day. And lo and behold, on that day, if you double check it, at 4 p.m., Edison said that there was a flux in the electrical capacitors that blacked out everything. It blacked out New York City for 3 days and blacked out everything between New York and Ohio for 28 days. And they said it had to do with a massive electromagnetic flux that was unexplainable, that happened in the quote, I'm quoting the paper now, the blink of an eye. And something happened where the Eldridge hit this endpoint and then snapped back to 1943 and somehow broke the chain, but still resulted in these massive time-space continuum holes every 20 years. And I'm working on a movie about it because Al Bielek claims he went to the year 2139, I think it was. And they were shown the future of Earth, that if they were to allow this thing to keep snapping back and forth, that it would destroy the time-space continuum and crack the planet open, and very bad things had happened. So I just think it's interesting that it's the 80-year anniversary of this.
80 years.
So we may expect something very bad to happen within the next couple of days, and or not. You know, it could have just ended in 2003 like it was supposed to have, but there may be something that happens in the next couple of days. So there you go.
Well, there's a lot of high weirdness these days.
Yes, sir.
Never seen so much. And so a lot of people are wondering, about what's going on right now. Is there even going to be an election?
I don't know why people keep saying that. It's study the movie The Matrix. If you remember The Matrix, the two things that Neo learns, the two major lessons in The Matrix, is that he speaks to the Oracle. And there's the Oracle and there's the Architect. The Architect in that movie, I mean, I used to teach that movie in class. The Architect in that movie talks about that they had 6 crops. One, they had a perfect society. Another one was based on slavery. Another one was, and so they kept losing crop after crop after crop of human beings, if you will. And it was the Oracle that came up with the way to keep people controlled. And the way to do it is, and this is what Neo finds out, is that he's all locked into this illusion of choice, that it's all about choice. It has nothing to do with choice. It has to do with control. And that's what the Oracle was trying to tell him, is that she and the computer programs were controlling everything. But when you left people with the illusion of choice, which are the elections, and that's why they've never canceled them, not even during the Civil War, for as much of a tyrant as Lincoln was, did they cancel the elections ever. Because once you keep people thinking that they have a choice, doesn't matter the election was completely fake. Doesn't matter that somebody pulled a switch at the Vatican and rigged the Dominion machines. Doesn't matter that somebody showed up at 1:34 a.m. with bags and bags and bags of votes. No, of course there's going to be an election because they have to fool people. Now, what might happen, this is what's interesting. The biggest thing happening now, and people think that they're going to vote their way out of this, and that's not how it's going to work, is that we're at the end of a 250-year cycle. We're at the end of a Pluto cycle. And so Pluto, when the United States was formed on 4th of July of 1776, and then really did not become the actual government we use today until almost September of until George Washington took over, because before that we had the Articles of Confederacy, and we had nine presidents of the Confederacy. The only reason I know this is because my great-great-great-grandfather, way back when, excuse me, was John Morton, who was a representative for Pennsylvania, came from Sweden, of all things. No, Finland, I'm sorry. And he's the one on the $2 bill. You see, he's got his hand on a stack of papers, and he's protesting when they're signing the Constitution, which is not really such a good idea. But it's what created the Confederation of States, which we all went back to when Jefferson Davis and the Confederacy then withdrew. So it's interesting to me that the Federalists are the ones that won, and it was Jefferson who was always yelling about it. Okay, so here's what's interesting about it astrologically. So Pluto is moving through Capricorn right now. Every time it hits 27 degrees, Pluto hits 27 degrees Capricorn, there's some kind of massive adjustment. So, for example, the last time I said this had to be 2008. It was actually in September of 2008. And the financial collapse that we saw in 2008 really happened on September 11th, 2008. And then it began to ripple throughout the economy where we didn't realize that we were screwed.
Very few people know that the financial
Yeah.
collapse.
Yeah. And the reason for this is because that's when Pluto moved to, it's when it moved into Capricorn. And when it hit 27 degrees Capricorn. Now, the next time it went there was February 22nd. And I used this modicum to predict the war with Ukraine, Russia and the war with Ukraine. And I think the only other person that got it right, weirdly enough, was Alex Jones. I don't know how he got his information, but I'm saying, look, there's going to be a war. It's going to have to do with Russia. Something's going to have to do with the collapse of Ukraine. And which is exactly how it came down. And
I would say Alex Jones has connections to Russian intelligence.
Well, he's connected to Israeli intelligence. What he is, his wife was a lawyer for the Bromphans, which is a big time Jewish confederation, yep. And who used to own Warner Brothers at one point.
Yep.
So and the
Kennedys.
Yeah, and the Debka files and all that other stuff. So now let's look at Trump and what he has to do with this. Trump is Trump is a Gemini. And when Pluto and Pluto finally moves out of Aquarius on it's actually November 19th, between November 19th and December 24th of 2024. If Trump gets in and you have Pluto successfully trining his chart. Now I did a big chart for him. And I was right. And let me tell you my predictions way back when. My prediction is that Trump would win the election hands down, which I think I was the only one that got right. Everybody's laughing at me. That he would win the election hands down, that he would usher in economic prosperity, but that he's stupid, and that he would surround himself. I saw him as Julius Caesar, and then he would surround himself with people that would stab him, basically people that would betray him, which is exactly what happened. You have Pence, you have Mark Meadows, everybody around him betrayed him.
Absolutely.
And at the same time, he was yelling and screaming about the election being fake. Now, isn't it interesting that the one enemy that the media really had was Tucker Carlson? BlackRock owns the Dominion Systems, has controlling stock in the Dominion Systems. BlackRock also owns controlling stock in Fox. So what do? They take a bunch of money, $270 million, and it goes from one pocket to another pocket because it goes to Dominion to pay off those lawsuits, unquote. And it pays off the lawsuits, and in exchange, they get rid of Tucker Carlson. Easy peasy. He's the number one guy on cable, and Fox rearranged this entire schedule to do that. So here's what goes on. Mark Meadows is the chief of staff. Everybody around Trump is not only bleeding him to death, but wants out. And they all want to go back to the swamp and get their shitty little jobs and don't want Trump fighting this thing. And so you've got Pence, who, has anybody seen the photos of Pence back when he was gay? Back when Pence used to be dancing around these gay pride parades in his little t-shirt, and makes me sick. And he's high-fiving with Nancy Pelosi when all he had to do was just question the outcome and say, well, maybe we need a little more investigation. That's it. And for him to get up there and say, oh, I chose the Constitution, he makes me vomit. And it was Sidney Powell. It was Sidney Powell and Ellen Wood that were coming to the White House door every day with truck after truck after truck of evidence of the fraud. And they were getting kicked in the teeth by Mark Meadows and said, get out of here, not interested. Bill Barr said, get out of here, not interested. And at the same time this was happening, sir, you had Trump not doing anything about it. And in the 60 lawsuits, I don't know why nobody's pointing this up. In the 60 lawsuits that they filed for election fraud, not one of them, not one, had a demand for discovery. You know that?
That is absolutely an astounding fact.
Not one.
No idea. Why in the world would you do something that stupid?
He's got bad advisors or something. Now, here's the interesting challenge. Now that he's going up against these guys in Georgia, it's a state case, which is why people are worried about it, because you can't just pardon yourself out of it. But the Georgia case actually will allow him to bring up discovery, finally. So you could have some kind of proof of the fraud in the election. Am I right or am I right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So if that happens, and they say, well, you question the election, which Hillary Clinton did every day of her wretched little life.
So did Al Gore.
Yeah, and Al Gore's and all that. You know why Hillary doesn't wear underpants? So she can get a better grip on her broom. I thought it was funny. So that gives him a shot here to be able to look through all this, and the whole thing was a Vatican operation, and it was a Vatican operation because Trump managed to completely destroy the Vatican Corporation that controls the United States, and take billions of dollars worth of gold out from the Vatican Bank and then repatriate it to the USA. So it'll be interesting to see how it comes down. And I think, we're standing at a precipice here. This is one of the things that I keep telling people, that it's almost impossible to predict the future, like I did back in the day. I mean, I used to make these stunningly accurate predictions, and I would make them in print, and I would make them on coast to coast in front of 27 million people, and yet still be called a fraud by these jackasses that run Paracast, or whatever the hell it is, or the UFO watch pigs. So the idea here is what's that?
Psychop.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're standing at a precipice here. And the precipice is, if Trump gets reelected, that's great. If they pull the same nonsense as they pulled before, and right now you have George Soros desperately trying to split the vote. Soros is funding two people. He's funding Michelle Obama, and he's funding Ron DeSantis. And the ideas, and it's interesting how you have this entire cycle repeating itself. The cycle that repeating itself is 1968. And if you'll notice, there were a whole series pardon me?
It feels like it.
Not only is it 1968, but look who's back in the race. Robert Kennedy Jr. back in the race. And you've got Michelle Obama as well. And you've got the, just like it was in 1968, the Democratic Convention. Is nobody noticing this? It's actually happening where? Do you know when the Democratic Convention is this year, Jay?
Where?
It's in Chicago.
Yeah, my God, that's right.
You know where it was in 1968? It was in Chicago. And of course, you had Hillary Clinton on the front page of Time magazine on the cover, throwing a Molotov cocktail in Chicago, and nobody seems to notice. So I am telling you, the Antifa guys, you think they were bad in 2020? They're going to burn that city to the ground. And at the same time, you're going to have Soros come in, and Soros somehow, some way, is gonna try to either grease in DeSantis to make sure that there's a good fight between him and Trump, whereas his money's behind DeSantis, whereas he doesn't have a chance right now, and Michelle Obama somehow, either putting her in as vice president, and then funding her.
I feel a little different. I see that Biden getting out for health reasons. Somehow they're going to get rid of Harris, and then they're going to run Michelle as president. I
said from jump that that the Soros money is going to be behind either Michelle Obama, and here's one other person that people have discounted. The one guy that I take seriously, and look, you can say this is just a crazy. Every time I've made a crazy prediction, it's always happened. But the one guy that really wants to run for president that has the money and the popularity to do it is Dwayne Johnson. You know who Dwayne Johnson is?
Yes, I do.
Rock. And
Rock, yeah.
I said that the poster should be the Rock on the sock running for president. So it's going to be interesting to see because Soros, he's the one that handed Barack Obama an $89 million check. He's the one that split the vote. He's the one that told Hillary, wait your turn. He's the one that backed 100%. Rockefellers were all behind Hillary because Hillary just wanted war and the destruction of Libya, and she didn't care about the sheep at all. She just wanted them all destroyed, and she was basically going to take us down the Rockefeller path of just lots of war. And Soros said, no, we're going to have Barack Obama because he can institute the healthcare system that Hillary tried to institute in 1993 and got laughed out of the Senate. And his exact words were, it's easier to put somebody in a cage if they've got a blanket and a pillow. And that's what the healthcare thing is going to be, a blanket and a pillow. So it'll be interesting to see how it all comes down, Jay. Obviously, but one way or another, we have the destruction of the United States coming up simply because it's a Pluto cycle. And then if we get through 2024, there's going to be amazing things are going to happen after that.
Well, I see a sort of like a realignment of states and things going on. Not only does Eastern Oregon want to join Idaho, but I think Eastern Washington also wants to join Idaho, and because I used to live there and I know, and I think the third district of Colorado could join Utah because of mostly the gun laws that are being enacted in Colorado, which is where I live, and live out in the middle of nowhere, and they're telling us that we can only have 7 clips in our gun, where it's just insane because there's nobody.
If they do what they're planning on doing with the elections, and if they pull the same stuff they planned the last time, then you are absolutely 100% right. You're going to be looking at a secession of the states.
Yep.
And remember that Texas is only part of the Union by the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo.
Yep.
And it's a treaty they ceremonially sign once every 2 years. And they can have their own money system. They're already hoarding the market for silver. They can have their own money system. They can completely withdraw by not signing that treaty. Then you're absolutely right. You'll have Oregon joining Iowa.
Idaho.
You'll have actually San Bernardino in California wants to secede from California.
I would say California will break apart with just the blue coastal areas, and then the rest will all be red.
Yeah.
What people don't realize about California is it's only nominally blue, and that's just concentrated in the big cities. But once you get out in the country, it's red, and Trump signs everywhere. So, I think you're going to see, Washington and Oregon are going to split apart. I think you could actually see parts of Canada joining America as Canada begins to deteriorate. Calgary would love to join Montana, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and so I think you're going to see all of that happen. British Columbia, the provinces in Canada are really loose together. They can break apart at any time.
Yes.
So, and they're the West and the East are at war with each other, just like in the United States. And so anything can happen,
Right. Well, let me get these in here because I just want to talk a little bit about so many people are asking me about the timelines and why the timelines have shifted, specifically away from maybe the biblical prophecies in the book of Revelation, which describes basically an interplanetary war between the Archangel Michael and the Great Red Dragon, or Draco, actually, the star Thuban. And I've written a series of books which has become my magnum opus and might actually be the last thing I do in my life, because I've been diagnosed with stage 4 squamous cell cancer. And now I have secondary cancer from the treatment because the treatment made everything worse.
Yeah,
And
I had stage 4 colon cancer in 2018.
oh, it's terrible. It's so terrible.
I feel sorry for you, and I'm sorry to.
So if you go to we're just about ready to start a big campaign. There's right now there's 7 books in the series. The latest book is called The Sumerian War. We have a big special on book 1. We've reduced the price of book 1 by like $20.
I'll link to this.
Pardon me?
I'll link to all this.
Thank you. And it's they're on Amazon or strangeuniverseradio.com. And so if you buy book 1, which is Sands of Time, the reviews have been fantastic. It's been humbling for me to be compared to Frank Herbert, Isaac Asimov, Ian Fleming, one of the greatest sci-fi book series ever written. And right now I'm desperately trying to finish before my birthday on October 1st. I'm trying to finish the Draco War, part 1 and part 2, which is the wrap up to the entire series. So there'll be 9 books in the series.
Wow.
And when they cut my throat, they put a tube in my throat. I couldn't speak for about 3 months. And my wife is terrible at charades. And I learned the difference between dogs. If you point at something, they'll look at what you're pointing at and go get the thing you're pointing at. Women and cats, if you point at something, they stare at your finger. It just, and then come up and rub your finger.
Yeah.
So, not being able to speak, I just channeled everything into writing. And the reviews have been just stunningly fantastic. I mean, I can't get over how great the reviews have been. And we got a 5-star rating on Amazon. Everybody that reads them just goes crazy. And the primary thing I want to point out is that it's all a true story. It's all based on a true story. And it's interesting that it had to do originally with a guy who came out of Area 51 who called himself Ghostwalker. And he was a super soldier who was an assassin. And I was working for Geraldo Rivera at the time. And we had a show called Now It Can Be Told. And Ghostwalker, Connor Hennessy or Derek Hennessy, whatever he was calling himself at the time, he came out and claimed that he had a stack of footage, a stack of paperwork. And that if we could get him money, or he wanted a lot of money for this stuff, which was tough. And then he eventually just disappeared. And we realized, I think, that he was a double agent that was just trying to figure out what people actually knew about Area 51. And I was one of the only people that knew anything about it because I'd actually climbed up a hill and looked down on the base, so I at least knew what it looked like. And he was able to describe what was here and what was where, so I knew he'd actually worked at the place. So another man was watching. And when all this came down, and with my appearances on Coast to Coast, and with my willingness to risk my life to get this information out to people, this man approached me, and he started coming up to me at lectures and seminars and calling me on the phone and saying, "You want to talk about this?" And it was a way for him to slowly release information by my taking it in and then reporting it on Coast to Coast in front of 27 million people, because we had this massive audience at the time. So the last I heard from him was Obama's inauguration. And I'd made him a bet of $100 that somehow, some way, Obama was going to screw up the oath, that he could not take the actual oath of office because he wasn't a citizen. And he thought that was absurd. And yet there was John Roberts screwing up the oath. Yeah. And Obama had to take it again the next day, supposedly. What's that?
In secret.
Yeah, in secret. Downstairs in the Situation Room, in front of a portrait of Carl Latrobe, who was the designer of Washington, D.C., a master mason designer of Washington, D.C. So I got these manuscripts from him just with the promise that I would not use his name or the names of his wife because he had living relatives. And I kept to it. And so I've been adapting this true story, this based on a true story. And it all takes place within the universe of top secret technology, real science, the stuff we really have, and which ET groups we're actually in contact with, which are good, which are bad. And it has so resonated with people. This truth has so resonated with people as to what's going on there. That it's the perfect place. Anybody that's into conspiracies, anybody's just now starting with their journey, this is the place to go. Because it's all about Dulce. It's all about the Dulce Wars. It's all about 5-1 and why it was important. It's all about S4. It's all about S2. And it's the reason why our timeline has been changed. Because we fight two major wars. We fight a war against the Sumerians, who had set up the Babylonian Empire, the Babylonian banking system, the Roman Empire, and then basically the Third Reich. And then it's about the Draco and the Draco, the Alpha Draconians, the peaceful ones. And there was a big war on Earth between the Draco, between the Illagim, who are the Babylonians, the Sumer, and another race of beings that were interdimensional. It's just is beyond my comprehension. And but they were responsible for 65 million years ago, the dinosaurs going extinct. And a plasma weapon that was used against both Mars and Earth, which is what created the Vilnius Marianas, this gigantic trench. It's almost 3,200 miles wide, 7 miles deep on Mars, with the exact same trench and the exact same geologic position, except smaller on Earth, just because when they used this weapon, it was further away. And
one on Venus.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So when they did this, it's all explained there about how the peaceful real reptilians went underground and turned to vegetarianism and of living happily as long as we leave them alone. And we do have diplomatic relations with them at the Pentagon, apparently. And a much darker group of reptilians who have been assisting the, I guess you call it the Illuminati, and how they can use their powers and abilities for various types of mind control.
So
and they are, and they do hunt human beings, and it's for sport, but they can also use a chemical that can actually hollow out the brain, and they can actually take control of a human body, and take control of that person's body, which is why we seem to have so many white people claim they have camouflage abilities. It's explained in the new book, in the new Sumerian War book.
And you're saying that the first group lives underground.
Yes. Yeah.
And are they the ones that they come out occasionally and have interactions with us?
They do. Yes. Matter of fact, there's two major nests. The first is under the Earth isn't hollow exactly, but it is a series of subcontinents. And the big subcontinent is under Egharta Major, which is underneath the Himalayas. And I've actually been spelunking there with. I used to live in a Nepalese monastery at the foot of Mount Everest, and then the other, and it's called Egharta Major, and then there's another group as well under the Gobi Desert, which is called Egharta Minor. And they live in pockets about 900 or so, and as I said, they're relatively peaceful. The darker ones that they call the dark real reptilians, those are the ones that provide the people on the surface with gold, diamonds, jewels, oil, all the things that come from underground that have made them fabulously wealthy in order to support them. And apparently a lot of people disappear in national parks. And I think that these are the real reptilians. It's all explained in the book. And it's the first time when I read this that I didn't think that David Icke was completely out of his rocker. because he talks all about the control of the reptilians, and I was like, well, how exactly does that happen? And this explains it. So for people that are questing, for people that are interested, for people that have questions about anything, um, the one thing I thought would catch on, and I was hoping to get like a meeting with Elon Musk or somebody, and I copyrighted it and I took a patent out on it, was the was the unified field theory. And Einstein came up with it, like he's sitting in his office in Cambridge, and he wrote an equation, a number of versions of this equation. And when he saw it, the legend is that he saw the face of God in this equation, and he just fell over dead. And that we took this paper out from underneath. It's actually scribbled on a piece of his stationery, and but it allows us to. The biggest thing about this equation is the first thing we developed was an ability to communicate anywhere in the universe, and we learned that everything in the universe is connected by strings. And if you look at the solar systems, and then you look at the galaxies, there's like a film or a web around everything.
They're called
And
currents.
yeah, and we have these watches that they call gravophones because they use gravity to communicate. And so you can actually use one of these watches, and you can communicate instantaneously with anyone anywhere in the universe. I mean, the other side of the universe, you can communicate instantaneously. And it was an effect that was discovered by Heinrich Mueller, who was transmitting music between Munich and St. Petersburg, and he did not understand how the effect worked, but they found that the music being played from St. Petersburg, even though it was the slave box, was being transmitted before it was being transmitted to the master control box. And it's pretty wild. And so there's that. And from this, from our early experiments in teleportation, around the early 1960s, we discovered how to develop a device called the time runner. And the time runners, once again, allow you, using Philadelphia experiment technology or Project Rainbow technology, allow you to teleport yourself from one place to another, again, instantaneously. And probably the most popular book is called the Vril Diaries, and it's the actual diary of Baron Fritz Ritter von Spottenheim. And he was the one that protected the Vril girls, these gorgeous supermodel women who would channel naked, who would grow their hair down to their ankles because they believed it gave them psychic powers and abilities. And they were all in Hitler's inner circle. And originally they were channeling a guy named Dietrich Eckart, who was the spiritual mentor of Hitler and
the guy that died in prison. What's his name?
yeah, Rudolf Hess. I'm sorry, Rudolf Hess. And then suddenly Dietrich Eckart moved aside, and they said, no, we got somebody else coming through. And they started talking about the Sumer. And the Sumer came through, and they said, we were the Babylonians. We've been here 500 million years. And they started communicating to Sigrun, who was one of the Vildaman girls, while she was romantically involved. And it talks about the sexual power that they had over men. And remarkable love story, an amazingly tender love story. But it's all about the inside inner workings of the Third Reich. I think it's the best of the books. And
one of my favorite stories.
Okay, well, this is the whole thing. And so for so long, people have been fascinated by the Vril-Damen and their goal towards Rumflugen, which is space flight. And they actually, this is what's remarkable. The biggest mystery of the 20th century is how the hell do the Germans go from Sopwith camels, Messerschmitts, biplanes in 1919, 1920 to suddenly having spacecraft by 1940. Well, and then
there's a secret ongoing project that started at least with Napoleon, if not earlier. I call it Project X, and You can go back and you can see the traces. They had the Nora Air Club in California in the
Right.
1850s, which was all run by Germans from Germany. They were flying craft. They were using anti gravity in the 1860s,
Yeah.
1870s in California, and this you can see the traces, and it's Germanic mostly. And I don't know why. I've been told that Germans have a propensity for, building engineering and things. David Paulides, who wrote the Missing 411 books, told me that one of the things that he discovered with the Missing 411 was two things. One, a lot of highly intelligent scientists and people like that were missing. And two, almost everybody was of German descent that goes missing.
Well, Sigrid or Maria Orsic, who all came from Zagreb,
Yep.
on March 11th, 1945, they put out a telegram that said, "No one is staying here. We are all going home." And they managed to pile in this spaceship, and they took 7 trips before the spaceship just broke. And they made a trip to Aldebaran. Apparently, it took less than 4 hours for them to go to Aldebaran, and they took 1,700 people with them. Himmler and uh, Wilhelm Schulman, from where we get the Schulman residents of Earth, were waiting in line to go on this, and the 7th trip just didn't come back. And there we go. I've got an entire document.
This is this super soldier that told you all this.
No, this is from the Wilhelm the Wilhelm Schulman comes from a document that basically says everything that I just told you, but it's his personal confession to the
I've
army.
seen it. I've seen it. Yeah.
And he says, yeah, they just got in a spaceship and took off. And, I was waiting in line and they never came back for us. And apparently each time the ship was in worse and worse and worse shape because every time they went through this
Yep.
teleport, if you will, the ship just started getting more and more damaged and dinged up and,
It weakened
all that.
the metal structure of the
Yeah.
ship until by the seventh.
But it's all there. It's the true history of mankind. And let me tell you that Earth is in, and they don't hide it from us. Earth is in a contested area of space. And that contested area of space is between 2 great empires. One is the Alpha Draconian Empire, which also had conquered Orion some time ago. That's where we get most of the Greys. And the other one are the Pleiadians. And the Pleiadians all come from Lyra and Aldebaran. And it's interesting because if you look at the NASA logo, on the left-hand side of the NASA logo is Alpha Draconis. There's one of the big empires there. And it's exactly like the Egyptians, where the Egyptians had Set, Seth, or Sutek. that was a serpent. And on the other side, you have the children of light, which are, Osiris and what have you, who are supposedly Pleiadians, I would think. And it's right there on the NASA logo. Actually, you have Orion at the top. You have, and everybody else. Now, if you look at the Space Force logo,
on the NASA logo, it shows a rocket that's off from Earth. It goes through the belt stars of Orion,
yes,
and then goes to the moon. And it's like, what?
And yet, if you look at the Space Force logo, Space Force has one bright star at the top, which is Aldebaran. And once again, you've got Alpha Draconis on the left and the Pleiades on the right. So if you understand the Great Pyramid of Egypt, when the downward path of the fall of man or the descent of humanity happens, which is about 2600 BC, it aligns directly with what was the North Star at that time, which was Thuban, which is the dragon star. Then it became Vega, then it became Polaris, and what have you. And every time you have a positive upward ascension in the pyramid, in other words, when the children of Israel escape from Egypt, and when you have, the birth of Jesus, everything aligns directly to the Pleiades as far as something good happening. And so it's interesting to see. I mean, the timeline of the pyramid is still laid out properly. It still predicts, and this is why it's very strange. because right now we're in the Exodus period, and it predicts a 40-year Exodus. So we're standing on the abyss. Then I think it's interesting because you got the WEA and Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates and all these people who are threatening to murder billions of people. And yet the Great Pyramid talks about that between 1949, 1930, 1999, I'm sorry, February 21st of 1999, all the way up to the year 2039 is the Great Exodus. And this Exodus means that all these people were to reincarnate on this planet starting about 1900 or so. They were to reincarnate, be here for the final exam, so to speak, and then in mass get taken off the world so they can clear out the movie theater once again, so that everybody can then come back after 2039 and begin to reincarnate again when Earth becomes a sacred world. And the thing it predicts next is that in 2034 is what it calls the Day of Appearance. That in 2034 there is some kind of massive interjection. There's some kind of there's really a massive salvation of Earth. There's some kind of extraterrestrial I guess a positive thing. It's called the Day of Appearance. And it's a direct line across from the River of Fire, which is a trough that was supposed to happen in 2012 that didn't. And this River of Fire was supposed to wipe out a whole bunch of people, and it didn't. But if you look at all this prophecy, you can't use Nostradamus anymore. His stuff ran out about 2005. You can't use Edgar Cayce anymore. His last big prediction was the Mount St. Helens volcano in 89, which he said was going to be, no, it was 79. He said it was going to be the early 80s. And that's about it for him. 74, he did predict we would find the Bimini Road, which leads us to Atlantis. And that's it. You got Gordon Michael Scallion, who was the Mac Daddy of earthquake predictors for a while, who went completely off track because he was so tied into a timeline that was no longer functioning, which had to do directly, again, with direct extraterrestrial intervention. On June 28th of 1992, there was an earthquake in Landers, California. And if that Landers quake had lasted another minute, you would have seen it represents a hinge or a wedge, and you would have seen his timeline occur. Now, it's really sad to see what happened to Gordon because he just kept going along his timeline, and people started threatening him on Coast to Coast because he was wrong over and over and over again. And I thought, it's really a shame because he really was accurate, and now he's just a complete nightmare. I don't know what he's even doing now. But all these people who went off track, and they went off track because people are working behind the scenes with secret technology, top secret government black world technology, as described in my Sands Time books, the only place you're going to see it, and how it's in action. And you have this man, Ted Humphrey, who fully understands that he is trying to change or shift the timeline to keep billions of people from dying. And he's not just fighting the extraterrestrial forces, he's also fighting the evil vril forces, or the Illuminati, or the Club of Rome, or whatever it is you want to talk about. The Carl Schwabs and the Bill Gateses, whatever. Now, there was a man who claimed to be a man in black, who gave an interview some time ago. I think it was 2010. And it was interesting for me because he said, if my timeline is correct, you're going to see the release of a massive plague or a virus that's going to occur in approximately between 2017 and 2020. Remember, he's talking about this back in 2010 because he bragged about actually murdering some people that I know, and specifically a female UFO researcher that he said he strangled to death. And of course, friends of mine like Phil Schneider, and of course, friends of mine like Danny Casolaro, and of course, friends of mine like John Hadley. I mean, I'm the only one alive, and all they managed to do to me was completely shame me, drag me through the mud, put me in prison, and then give me throat cancer to try to kill me, and I'm not dead yet. Um, so it's going to be interesting to see how it works, because you do have white hat forces. Now, with that being said, um, the white hat guys that are feeding you this ridiculous information now, um, Wano Sabin comes to mind. You probably know who that is, right? Wano Sabin. So he calls me on the phone, and on January 6th of all things, on the day it happened in 2021, and says, "Don't out me, man. Don't out me." And I said, "Why would I out you?" And he said, "Well, I got this good thing going where, Wayne Willie and his circus." And I said, "I'm not going to out you, but you claim to be friends with Trump." And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "I got a pardon sitting on his desk. Get him to sign it." And he's like, "Oh, that's for further down the line, man. I guarantee you he's going to be president on January 20th." And then it was, "I guarantee he was going to be president on April 4th. Oh, I guarantee he was going to be president." I gave him all these dates. And I said, "You guys are not only full of it, but what you are is that Stalin set up an organization after the Bolsheviks took over, which was a fake counter-revolutionary organization he called the Trust. And the Trust was to field, use, and divert funds from Andrew Carnegie, from Henry Ford, from all these big major industrialists who were trying to stop Stalin from murdering millions upon millions upon millions of white Christians in Russia. And none of it came to any fruition on any of this. But it took a man named Sidney Riley, who was the guy who started British intelligence with what was called Special Directorate One, who tried to warn everybody that this trust group was fake. And he actually went into Russia, met with the trust, and said, "I want to see telegraphs blown up. I want to see phones blown up. I want to see train stations blown up. And I want to see you assassinate Joseph Stalin." And Stalin went crazy. Felix Dzerzhinsky was head of the Cheka, that was the precursor to the KGB, had him arrested, and Sidney Riley died supposedly in a prison in Siberia. There's a fantastic BBC series about it called Riley Ace of Spies. That if you want it, it's only 10 parts. It's well acted. It basically introduced Sam Neill to the world. But if you want to see what I'm talking about, it's great because it describes, everything that was happening politically around that time.
Yeah, there's a lot of vacuum cleaner operations going on. Hey,
Yeah.
listen, Sean, it's really
Yes,
good
sir.
having you on,
Thank
and
you.
I'd like to have you back. Um,
Love to come back.
yeah,
Thanks,
and
Jay. It's just an honor to meet you. You've been behind so many great things. I feel like you and I throughout all this have been the precursors behind the scenes to make things happen. And this was way back when I started the Sci-Fi Channel with the first original shows, when I started UPN with Strange Universe, which ran for about 3 years or so. You and I are the original thinkers that always get the ball rolling and get people thinking and get the original impetus, the original point of the spear. So it's an honor to meet you. It really is an
I want to
honor
meet
to
you
meet you.
too. I've wanted to meet you for a long time. I've admired your
Thank you.
work,
Well, we've
and
been circling each other for a while.
yeah, we have, and we're kind of we're near the same age, and we've got the same kind of background in media, and we're both Woosters, so we like the same kind of subjects.
Well, let me help. Like I said, if you got anything you want to do, anything in production, I mean, I like being behind the scenes better, but anything that has to do with cameras, production,
Great. Love to be your brother.
all of that. So
Yeah.
and we're trying right now. I just sold the rights to Sands of Time to a second company that's looking on turning Sands of Time into a TV series, another X Files. And so we'll see what happens with that. But Jay, I can't thank you enough for having me on. I'm sorry my voice is not so good, and
That's all right. You're
and
doing fine.
next time I'm on, I'll have my I'll have my headphones and my soundboard and the whole thing, because my computer's in the shop until Monday.
Yeah.
But
No
when I
problem.
get it
Good
out,
job.
I'll give you a call.
All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. I am Jay Weidner, and this is Reality Check. And I will be back. We'll talk about streaming and how streaming has destroyed the movie business. That's my next show. All right. See you later.
Bye.